Hello and welcome to Annie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Horror at Osborne House. Osborne House stood regally against the backdrop of the Isle of Wight's rolling green hills, its ornate facade illuminated by the gentle rays of the late afternoon sun. Built as a summer retreat for Queen Victoria, the house was a popular tourist attraction, drawing visitors curious to step into the opulent world of royalty. Holly Arnold, a journalist with a penchant for the macabre, had come not for the grandeur but for the whispers of ghostly tales that clung to its gilded walls. Holly joined the last guided tour of the day, her notebook tucked under her arm. The group, led by a cheerful guide named Margaret, was a small middle-aged couple, a history buff, and a pair of teenagers who seemed more interested in their phones than the tour. "This way, everyone," Margaret said. Osborne House was Queen Victoria's favourite residence. Holly trailed at the back of the group, her eyes scanning the portraits and artifacts. Something about the house felt alive. The polished wooden floor seemed to breathe beneath her feet, and the ornate mirrors lining the walls reflected more than just her image. As they entered the Dubber Room, a lavish space filled with Indian-inspired decor, Holly's gaze was drawn to a portrait of Queen Victoria in her later years. The Queen's eyes seemed to follow her, their painted depths heavy with unspoken sorrow. Legend has it, Margaret said with a conspiratorial smile, that Queen Victoria's spirit still roams these halls, particularly here in the Dubber Room. Some say she's searching for something. The teenagers snickered, but Holly felt the chill creep up her spine. Her hand instinctively went to her notebook, as if to anchor herself. The tour moved on, but Holly lingered behind. She stood before the Queen's portrait, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. The air grew thick, the temperature dropping noticeably. The faint scent of lavender, Victoria's favourite fragrance, wafted through the room. At Holly Arnold, a voice whispered. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. The room was empty. At Holly the voice repeated. The shadows in the room deepened, coalescing into a form. Before her stood a spectral figure, unmistakably Queen Victoria. Her black morning dress billowed as if caught in an invisible breeze, and her pale face was etched with grief. "You can see me," the ghostly Queen said. Holly stumbled back, her mind reeling. This can't be real enough," Victoria replied. "I need your help." Holly's journalist instincts kicked in, overriding her fear. "Help?" Victoria gestured toward a small door in the corner of the room, one Holly hadn't noticed before. "There is something I must retrieve." Compelled by a force she couldn't explain, Holly followed the spectral Queen. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling downward. The air grew colder with each step, and Holly's flashlight flickered, its beam barely penetrating the darkness. At the bottom, they entered a hidden chamber lined with dusty shelves. In the center of the room stood a glass display case, its contents obscured by a thick layer of grime. Victoria pointed to it. "Inside lies a locket. It holds a strand of Albert's hair, a token of our love. It was stolen from me after his death, hidden here by someone I trusted. Without it." Holly wiped away the grime, revealing a delicate gold locket. As her fingers brushed it, a jolt of energy surged through her. The room filled with whispers, angry and accusatory, as if the house itself disapproved of her actions. "That," Victoria urged. Clutching the locket, Holly raced back up the stairs. The walls seemed to close in around her, the whispers growing louder, almost deafening. She burst into the Dubber Room, gasping for air. Victoria stood before her, her ghostly form flickering like a dying flame. "You have done well, Miss Arnold. Now." Holly hesitated but complied, tucking the locket into a hidden compartment at the base of the frame. The room brightened, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a storm had passed. Victoria's form began to fade, her expression one of profound relief. Thank you, Holly. You have given me what was stolen, and with it." As the ghost vanished, Holly sank to the floor, her body trembling. When the tour group and Margaret finally found her, she was staring at the Queen's portrait, its painted eyes now serene. Holly never spoke of the encounter, but her article on Osborne House hinted at something more than history lurking within its walls. And as she left the Isle of Wight, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been chosen for something extraordinary. The portrait of Queen Victoria remained unchanged to most, but to Holly it would always hold a secret, a bond forged in the shadows of the past. Holly couldn't leave the experience behind. Even as she sailed back to the mainland, the spectral Queen's words lingered in her mind, "You have given me peace." But what haunted Holly wasn't the Queen's gratitude, it was the sense that Osborne House itself had not forgiven her trespass. The nights that followed were restless. Holly's dreams were filled with visions of the double room, its shadows stretching unnaturally long, and the whispers she had heard in the hidden chamber now forming fragmented sentences. "It is not over. You disturbed the balance." On the third night after her return, Holly woke abruptly to find her notebook on the floor, its pages fluttering as though caught in an unseen wind. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The smell of lavender filled her room, stronger this time, almost suffocating. The locket. Holly hadn't thought about it since placing it in the portrait. But now, as she stared at her scattered notes, a chilling realization gripped her. Had she truly resolved the Queen's unfinished business, or merely awoken something far older, something that had lain dormant until her interference? Her journalist's curiosity warred with her mounting fear. Holly knew there was only one way to find out. She needed to return to Osborne House. The following weekend, she found herself once more at the gates of the estate. The winter air bit at her cheeks as she approached the house, its grand facade now shadowed by storm clouds rolling in from the sea. The cheerful guide, Margaret, was absent, replaced by a stern-looking man who eyed Holly suspiciously when she asked for access to the Durbar room. "It's closed for renovations." Holly persisted. "I'm writing a follow-up piece on the house's history." The man's gaze hardened. "The Durbar room is off-limits." Defeated but undeterred, Holly waited until the tour had moved on before slipping away. Her heart pounded as she retraced her steps to the room. The door was locked, but a nearby window provided access. The storm outside offered cover as she climbed through, landing softly on the polished floor. The Durbar room was just as she remembered it, lavish, imposing, and heavy with an unseen presence. The portrait of Queen Victoria loomed over her, its serene gaze almost mocking. Holly approached it cautiously. "What am I missing?" The room answered. A deafening crack of thunder shook the house, and the air grew icy. The shadows in the corners deepened, pulling together into a writhing mass. From it emerged a figure not Victoria, but something darker, its shape flickering as if undecided. You meddled," the entity hissed. "You gave her peace, but what of us?" Holly stepped back, her pulse racing. "Who are you?" "We are the forgotten," it replied. "The servants who toiled unseen, the children who died unheard, the souls trapped in her shadow. When you freed her, you unbalanced the scales. Now, do we demand restitution? I didn't mean to. You cannot undo what is done." "Ah." The locket in the portrait began to glow, its light casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The entity gestured toward it. "Take it, carry it with you, and bear the weight of what you've unleashed." Holly hesitated. Every instinct screamed to her to run, but she knew there was no escaping this. With trembling hands, she retrieved the locket from its hiding place. The moment her fingers closed around it, a searing pain shot through her, and the world around her dissolved. Holly awoke in a dimly lit room, the scent of lavender overpowering. She was no longer at Osborne House, but in a place that seemed suspended between worlds. Shadows danced on the walls, forming fleeting images of people, servants polishing silver, children playing, a young woman crying softly into her hands. The entity's voice echoed around her. Their stories must be told, their pain acknowledged. A notebook appeared in her lap, its pages blank, but for the first words etched in blood-red ink, "Begin." And so Holly wrote. She wrote of the nameless maid who died of exhaustion, the orphan boy who succumbed to the cold, the governess who was dismissed in disgrace. Each story poured from her as if the spirits themselves guided her pen. When Holly finally returned to the real world, she found herself standing outside Osborne House, the locket clutched tightly in her hand. The storm had passed, and the house looked almost serene. But Holly knew better. The stories she had written were still in her notebook, and the weight of their truth pressed heavily on her soul. She left the Isle of Wight soon after, but the locket remained with her. Its presence served as a constant reminder of her pact with the forgotten. Wherever she went, whispers followed, urging her to uncover more untold stories to give voice to the voiceless. Holly had become more than a journalist. She was now a keeper of the past, a chronicler of the unseen. And though the task was burdensome, she embraced it, knowing that only through her could the rest of us find peace. But deep in the shadows of Osborne House, something watched. Something waited. For even the best intentions can sow the seeds of new horrors. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.